Welcome to the complete beginner's guide to oil painting. In this comprehensive video, we are going to take a look at all the materials you'll need to get started, the safety concerns with the medium, beginning color palettes, and how you should begin painting with foundational techniques. But first, let's start with the obvious. What is oil painting? Oil painting, the way we understand it today, can be accredited to Dutch master painter Jan van Eyck, perfecting the techniques in the early 15th century, predominantly working with the figure in the portrait. His works are characterized by a fastidious attention to detail and vivid colors. However, the earliest known examples of oil painting can be found in Afghanistan, dating all the way back to 650 AD. Looks like they beat you to it, Jan. Jan. Artist oil paints are comprised by either mixing organic or inorganic dry powdered pigments and suspending them in selected refined drying oils, with the most common being a linseed oil. However, walnut, poppy, and safflower oils can also be used depending on the pigment and the manufacturer. Oil paint can also contain additional ingredients. For example, certain colors might have a solvent added in to aid in fluidity and flow, while some might have a varnish mixed in to even out the sheen and add some gloss. And other colors require the use of stabilizers to aid in the bond with the oil, such as a beeswax or an aluminum stearate paste. Okay, who turned out the lights again? Oh, hey, Walter. Oh no, is the Academy already here?
Michael, you have interrupted the practice of apprentice paintmaking. Behold the complexity and the skill. Just the perfect amount of oil, and only masterful mixing will do.
Aren't you guys gonna get a really gritty mixture if you're not properly mulling it?
I knew we forgot something. Walter, just stop, please stop. Oh, Scully, not now.
Okay guys, thanks for the demo, but I've got to get back to the video.
The Academy will be notified for this intrusion, Michael.
Nice. Speaking of academic painting, for me, the oil paintings of Bert Morisot and James Whistler are two of the best that embody the qualities of the medium. Oil as a slow-drying binder allows for ample time to mix, blend, and to easily scrape away for constant revisions. Oil painting is wonderfully versatile, permitting for various techniques and approaches, from the instant to the labored, while embodying a wide range of elements from fluid drawing to sculpture. Oil has a proven permanence and elegance, and is only triumphed by its earned prestige. On to the materials, starting with the paint itself. As discussed earlier, the foundation of oil paint is just oil and pigment. However, you'll encounter really two different levels of paint. First, the entry level or student grade paint, formulated for the classroom, are meant as an exploration of the media while keeping prices lower. In general terms, using less pigment or cheaper replacements and more filler. This combination usually results in weaker tint strengths and duller overall colors, in addition to avoiding any heavy metal stabilizers in the mixture. Meanwhile, oil paints labeled as artist or professional grade are typically mixed to the highest standards of that manufacturer, using more pigments, truer pigments, and less fillers. Because of the more substantial pigment load, the paints are consistently more pure and more vibrant, and they last twice as long as their counterpart. But they can cost 2 to 3 times more than the equivalent student grade version. And in the case of true cerulean, 13 times more? Yikes! Why the huge difference, you should ask? Many student grade colors aren't just a reduction of the original pigment, but they are made from another cheaper and sometimes safer alternative pigment altogether. Those paints are often marked with a hue on the label. So cerulean blue hue from Winsor Newton's Winton line uses a combination of a zinc white, a phthalocyanide green, and a phthalocyanide blue to match the color and hue of a true cerulean pigment, Pigment Blue 35, which uses both cobalt and tin as color stabilizers, enriching the color and driving up the cost. To help the customer decode this, most paint companies will use a series number to simplify the relative price of the paint, determined by the cost of the pigment. So a lower number means a cheaper paint in both cost and makeup, while a higher number signifies a much more expensive paint due to a more rare or costly pigment. So initially, stay with lower series paints or student grade paints to avoid the higher costs. However, student grade paints aren't just meant to save the learner money. They are mainly designed to be safer in the classroom environment. And within student grade paints, there's a wide range of quality, both in color and texture. Personally, I always recommend Gamblin's 1980 line, or Winton by Winsor Newton. Both paints are of good and consistent quality. And the same thing goes for artist grade paints. There is a wide range of quality and textures on the market. Personally, I recommend M. Graham & Co. Currently, for the price, it is some of the best paint out there. Now, there's a case to be made for starting out with artist grade paints. Mainly, it's the quality of the product. That quality does translate to better habits, such as consistent color mixing. Nevertheless, I always recommend for the beginner student grade paint. Besides the initial very large cost savings, student grade paints are typically safer due to the replacements of the much more expensive heavy metal stabilizers. More on this during the safety section of this video.
Nice foreshadowing, Michael.
Right? A little teaser for them. Anyway, getting to know color is such a daunting task, especially when first just beginning. Mainly because there are just so many colors out there to choose from. Surprisingly enough, most of the paint colors sold today are either variations of the same pigments, or they are mixtures of two or more of those pigments. These mixtures are lovingly referred to as convenience colors. For instance, King's Blue, one of my most favorite colors. Actually, I like that color so much I bought a cute little coffee mug in that color. Regardless, the oil paint mixture is just ultramarine blue and a titanium dioxide, so it is very easily mixed together. And if you use that color combination a lot, then you can just buy it instead of mixing it every time, i.e. convenience. It would behoove you to become familiar with pigments, the earlier the better. Being able to note pre-made color mixtures and understanding the colors that are best for your mixes will save you a ton of money and time in the long run. And don't get me started on how many different colors are just varying tints or mixtures of phthalocyanide blue. And that's just what's in front of me. Later in the video, we will expand on basic color theory and color palettes. But for now, my final thoughts on choosing the best paint for you. Honestly, it's a very personal experience. That's why every painter seems to enjoy a different brand. First and foremost, your preferences will evolve as you develop as a painter. In my opinion, besides the cost, the main variable is the consistency and the texture of the paint. Yes, the color and the pigment load are very important. However, learning to see color takes a little bit of time, even when using the best materials. It is more the application of the paint that will begin to immediately inform and create your brushwork and mixing habits. Put very simply, If you don't like the feel or the texture of one brand, just try another. Please do not get caught up in the notion that the more expensive the paint is, then the better it is. All painters have made that mistake. Rather, just focus on painting, paying close attention to the surface and how that paint feels. Finally, be mindful that developing a competency takes time and materials. So no matter what series, grade, or brand you decide on, you'll be buying a lot of it. Now let's go from oil paint to palettes. The artist's palette is an essential tool in the painting process, and one that is often overlooked when first beginning. Very simply, the artist's palette is a flat, smooth, non-porous surface in which a painter creates an arrangement of their colors and mixes. Palettes can be made from a variety of materials, including but not limited to glass, wood, paper, ceramic, or plastic. Let's begin with the glass palette. For better durability and your protection, stick to tempered safety glass, which you can easily find online for a reasonable cost, or have it cut at your local hardware store. Typically, you'll save a little bit of money, but there you can always get a bigger and custom size. However, the cheapest route is to use the glass from an old picture frame, but please make sure you have a good strong backing underneath that glass, because it tends to be thin and can crack very easily. When the paint is still wet, cleaning is just a breeze, either with the swipe of a knife or the wipe of a rag. Yet still, you will need a razor glass scraper for that more stubborn and dried paint. Yet another reason to buy a tempered safety glass. I collect my scrapings in a glass jar for proper waste disposal, but also pride. It is always quite surprising to see how much paint is discarded while making a painting, but it is also really pretty too. Finally, to clean up any persistent smears, just go ahead and use a little bit of solvent on a rag. There you go, it's all ready for the next session. The wood palette is the traditional artist palette, and I have to admit, I tend to romanticize them a little bit. I mean, how could you not? When you see the older photos of the legendary John Singer Sargent painting in the fields of Italy, and then again in his studio in Paris, it just ignites inspiration. The painter's palette has always been a symbol of pride, elegance, and craft, exhibited here with Anders Zorn's self-portrait with a model, staging the artist in his element. Wait, what's that right there? Could that be the renowned Zorn color scheme resting on his palette? Nice job, Anders. Another great example is captured by the Italian Baroque artist Artemisia Gentileschi in her masterpiece showcasing herself in the midst of creating, smashing the cultural gender norms of the time. So for me, the wooden palette harkens back to the era of rich traditions and true creativity. Back to the basics. The wood palette is regularly made from birch. Thus, the porous surface needs to be sealed properly. To do so, just use a bit of your artist oil and rub it thinly across with a rag. As you use a wooden palette, you will slowly build a rich, oiled patina on the surface. Remember, because the wood is porous, it is important to clean the palette after every session while the paint is still wet. For stains that are starting to dry, again, you can use some solvent on a rag. But always follow that deep cleaning with another thin application of oil. And after many uses, they become a beautiful artifact of your creations. Right? Anyway, other options include disposable palette paper, which is typically a coated wax or silicone paper. A fast and temporary solution that I don't really recommend unless you hate cleaning and love to play trash ball. Ceramic and porcelain surfaces can also work really well, but they can get expensive and they are very fragile. Yet it's really fun to rededicate an older plate. And finally, plastic can be used. It is a decent solution, but they consistently stain. And cheaper plastics do degrade after being exposed to solvents. In reality, both ceramic and plastic palettes are just better suited for watercolor and acrylic paint. My final thoughts on palettes for the new painter. As we just talked through, I would either recommend a glass or a wooden palette. But no matter what you select, choose a palette that's larger than what you think you'll need. It is very easy for an artist at any level to lose an artwork with a smaller, cluttered, overcrowded palette. A good rule of thumb is the more organized your palette, the more organized your painting. And please don't get caught up in the color and the value of the palette. Just stick to the neutrals, either a white, a gray, or a natural wood. This will help you limit any value or color visual conflicts. And no matter what you choose, a color will look different on your palette than it will on your painting. And again, through continual practice, a palette is just a trained preference. After the artist eye has learned how to see, then literally anything can be used as a palette, and can coincidentally become works of art in themselves. Pablo Picasso occasionally fashioned palettes out of rough cardboard, thumbhole and all. Turns out this one sold at auction in 1961 for over 56,000 British pounds. Nice job, Pablo. And the unintentional masterpiece created by Francis Bacon, where he used the walls of his studio as his palette to test out his color mixes, playfully referring to them as his only abstract paintings. By the way, I highly recommend the book The Brutality of Fact. Over 20 years of interviews which gave us invaluable insights to his creative process. Working in partnership with the artist palette is the palette knife. An indispensable tool, typically shaped like a trowel with a deep angled bend in the handle. Used mainly for mixing your colors. They can be found in a variety of shapes and sizes, with an assortment of tips. The palette knife can also be used to apply large sculptural amounts of paint, leaving behind mountainous textures. And as you can tell, I'm a fan. The visual element of texture is so important in painting, exemplified beautifully by the impasto patterning of Vincent van Gogh. His paintings are not just an image, but they are a tactile object to be experienced. A categorization seemingly lost in our contemporary time is noting the difference between a palette knife and a painting knife. A palette knife generally has a straight blade or a slight bend coming out of the handle, a wider trowel-shaped end, and it tends to be stiffer to help mix the paint, but also to clean and scrape your palette. Traditionally, a palette knife meant for mixing paint on your palette is not meant for painting. Meanwhile, a painting knife has a deep bend in the handle so that your knuckles don't hit the painting. It also has a thinner, more springy blade. This is to help apply the paint with some sensitivity. And please pardon me, like most artists, I use these titles interchangeably. And like most painters, I also use these knives out of their original intended use.
Typical modernity.
My apologies to the Academy. But honestly, the distinctions that define their use are so subtle that they both work for mixing, painting, and even scraping. Personally, I don't worry about the title of the knife and reach for the shape, size, and stiffness to complete the task at hand. Like all things art, experimentation and repetition are key. Okay, here are my recommendations. First, choose metal knives over plastic. Maybe it's because I'm heavy-handed, but plastic knives tend to bend and break quite easily. Metal knives are just more durable and you will get more out of your money. Plus, they are way easier to clean. All you'll need is your glass scraper, a flat surface, and a steady hand. To start off, I would encourage you to buy a small set of knives with a wide variety of shapes and sizes, and from deep angled handles to straight edges. This assortment should give you the proper tool for any number of possible choices. However, if you just had to choose one for your palette and painting needs, I would choose a medium-sized painting knife. Finally, I always recommend buying the knives that are a solid piece of metal. Buying a knife that is two pieces soldered together, typically they fail right at the connection. Of course, this is probably because I've been using these knives wrong the whole time. But who's counting?
Oh, the Academy is keeping score.
I'm sure they are. On to the wonderful world of brushes. And I do mean world because it is vast with seemingly endless choices. So I might dance around a little bit because we have a lot to cover. Let's begin with the largest category, oil and acrylic brushes. Both have more rigid hairs and a direct snapback to their original form. This allows them to successfully move around the heavier paint. Remember, oil paint is consistently a thick, paste-like mixture, so you'll want to avoid any brush where the hairs just flop over. Now within the oil brush category, there are two divisions: natural hairs and synthetic hairs. Natural hairs work better with oil paint. The oil coats, conditions, and protects the hairs. Also, natural hairs tend to hold their shape better than their counterpart, but they are not as durable as synthetic, so they will eventually wear down over continuous use. Natural hair brushes get divided into two more categories: hog hair bristles and sable hair. Hog hair bristle brushes, and as the name would suggest, these hairs come from a boar or a hog. Being naturally coarse and stiff, they are better suited for thicker paint, and they can hold a lot of it. These brushes are mainly used for chunking in large areas of paint or leaving behind a rougher texture. Personally, I either use these for an underpainting or the initial lay-in. Of course, it depends on the manufacturer, but hog hair is generally less expensive than sable. Now that's a nice segue. Sable brushes, considered by many painters as the finest brushes produced, typically made from the hairs of minks, ferrets, and/or weasels. These animals provide a considerably softer and thinner hair than hog, which allows for more flexibility and movement with the paint, making them an ideal choice for thinner paints and mixes, including watercolor. These brushes are mainly used for blending, subtle refinements, and great edge control. All of this just increases the price more and more, making them some of the most expensive brushes on the market. Whoa, okay, hold on, time out. As a beginner, you should still know about this. While sable brushes can be just exceptional, I recommend you avoid sable brushes when you're first getting started. Mainly because you can almost spend your entire budget on one high-end brush. Especially here in the United States, where the import of Kolinsky sable has been banned for about a decade, further driving up the prices. Just stick to synthetics. They are kinder to your wallet, and they're kinder to mustelids. Speaking of, synthetic brushes are typically made from nylon and/or polyester, and many are made to mirror the qualities of hog hair and sable brushes. Overall, they tend to be stronger and more durable, easier to care for, and cheaper than natural hair brushes. However, they don't hold their form as well as natural brushes, and they tend to splay and spread out over continual use. Synthetic brushes typically hold and release oil paint more efficiently, and they have a smoother finish with less textures, compared to coarser natural hairs. It is not just the hair type, but the brush shape that plays a role in the look and the feel of a mark. And there is a plethora of brush shapes. But the four foundational shapes are the bright, the flat, the round, and the filbert. Starting with the flat. The flat is the classic shape of an artist painting brush, squared off across the top to create a long rectangular head. Flats have a longer hair, giving the brush a good length. And as a general rule with brushes, the longer the hairs of a brush, the looser the brush, with little snapback. Plus, the longer the hair, the more paint the brush can carry. The flat is the ideal for a long stroke that holds a clean and chiseled shape. Plus, flats can create consistent short marks. By turning the brush to the side, the artist can create thin, soft slashes with a tapered end. In addition, the flat is also an excellent blender for larger areas. The second classic brush shape is the round. A round is usually long in length, with a rounded tip and a round diameter. A well-titled brush, if you ask me. The round brush can be used in a number of ways, creating varying thin lines to thick shapes in the same stroke. Rounds are also great for more fluid drawing, filling in areas, and softer edges. While smaller round brushes are perfect for those tiny details. Up next is the bright, a variation of the flat with a shorter length hair, while still carrying the same squared off top edge. Brights are more suited for the quick structured mark. Again, by turning the brush to its side, the artist can create short, straight marks, which are perfect for geometric and planar drawing. As mentioned earlier, a bright is really just a pre-made, worn-down, well-used flat brush. Remember, because of the longer hair, flats can carry more paint, thus creating a longer stroke. But the longer the mark, the more the initial shape will soften. And due to the smaller hairs, a bright holds less paint, generating a shorter but more concentrated mark. Finally, there's the filbert, which lands somewhere in between a flat and a round. An excellent all-purpose brush that maintains a longer squared-off stroke with a softer edge. And because of those rounded corners, it is just a terrific blender. Just like the bright, the filbert is a pre-made, worn-in flat brush. As you use a flat brush, the corners tend to wear down first. This becomes more pronounced as the artist holds the brush at a steeper angle. Ultimately, rounds and filberts paint very similarly, and flats and brights produce a comparable shape. Remember, brights and filberts are based on worn-in flats. These are really brushes of convenience, ready to maintain the repeated habits of the painter. There are just so many variations of brush shapes, either to fulfill a very specific technique or to help convey a certain look and feel. And even with all of these choices, there is a long-standing tradition of artists creating their own brush shapes to either speed up the convenience of the application or to create a unique and specific mark that is needed to resolve a painting. And yes, I have done this many times, but I've only ruined a few. Okay, I've actually ruined a lot of them. Alright, here's the honest truth. It is not about the highest quality hair, nor the uniqueness of the most perfect brush shape. It is more about your control and the movement of the brush that defines the strokes, and with it the infinite possibilities that are left behind on the canvas. The last nuance of brushes is the handle length. There are longer handles around 12 inches, and there are shorter handles around 7 to 8 inches. Longer handle brushes are really meant for larger paintings, so you can get further back from the painting so you're able to see more of it. Longer handles allow for a larger range of motion and a more fluid movement with the brush, while a short handle brush is more fitting for smaller works. But either for a large or a smaller painting, a shorter handle allows the artist to zoom in on the work and to exert more control over the brush. However, an artist can always grip up closer on a longer handle brush to gain the needed control for those details and final marks. While the lengths do have their own benefits, it'll really come down to your preferences. Okay, let's build an introductory set of brushes, focused around the classics, the flat and the round. including a mix of hog hair and synthetics. I recommend 3 flats and 2 round brushes. With the flats, I would suggest getting a 1-inch wide, a 1/2 inch wide, and a 1/4 inch wide. In regards to the rounds, I would recommend a number 4 or 5 and a number 0. Once again, selecting the hair type is really your preference. Many artists swear by the durability and the smoothness of synthetics, while a lot of painters love the tradition and the textures of natural hair brushes. When starting out, ideally I would recommend buying a set of 5 in both synthetic and natural hair brushes, to familiarize yourself with each, but to also help determine and set your own personal preferences. However, if you'd like to just buy one set, I always endorse hog hair for the larger brushes and synthetic hair for the medium to smaller brushes. Finally, I would encourage you to select long handles for all of your brushes, except maybe your 0 round. Being a detail brush anyway, the shorter handle allows for much better control. With just these 5 brushes, you'll be able to cover a large range of widths and create a vast array of marks, shapes, and textures. There are plenty of great brushes out there, and many are at a very reasonable cost. I am always happy to recommend anything from Simply Simmons to Robert Simmons, either in natural hair or synthetic. And my personal favorite brushes are these mixed synthetics from Utrecht. They really are a wonderful brush that maintains their shape. They are so durable and their quality far exceeds their price tag. A few final thoughts on brushes. Do not buy super expensive brushes when you begin. The subtle step up from the average brush is going to be difficult to appreciate without a number of paintings underneath your belt. Sadly, the more you spend does not translate to a competency. But don't buy the cheapest brushes either. They could very well impede your development and cause some serious frustration, especially the brushes that are made in Flop City and are shedding monsters. I said shedding. Seriously though, spending all of your time picking out little tiny hairs out of your painting? It's not worth it. Once you get used to the materials and the medium, you'll realize that a brush is just a brush. And it's all about your preferences and your application needs. And please feel free to work with brushes outside the oil and acrylic categories. A lot of painters, including myself, really enjoy working with synthetic watercolor brushes instead of natural sable hair. And they really are as delicate and smooth for most applications. Plus, they are way cheaper. Just keep in mind that watercolor brushes are principally designed to push around water, which is considerably lighter than oil paint. Thus, you will want the hairs of that brush to still be rigid enough to push around that oil paint properly. When it comes down to it, brushes are consumable tools, so really don't be afraid to use them and paint a lot to unlock your talent.
Please make sure you clean all those brushes before you return them.
Of course, BrushBot, I was just about to do that. While on the subject, the cleaning and care of your brushes is required maintenance to sustain the quality, but to also extend the longevity of your investments. However, we won't be going through that information in this video, because I already have a brush cleaning tutorial at your disposal. In that lesson, we take you step by step through proper cleanings, both temporary and extended. Plus, we show you how to restore a hardened brush, and we go over all the materials to do so. The link is in the description. Oh, Odie, fallen asleep already, pal? I know it's our longest video yet, and we're not even halfway through it. So, onwards and upwards to solvents. Too much? Artist solvents are used to thin, mix, and dissolve oil-based paints, stains, and varnishes, commonly being used as a brush and surface cleaner, but solvents are involved in numerous other aspects, from oil painting techniques, or as the dryers in many artist mediums, to thinning out varnishes. Solvents can be one of the more toxic components in all of oil painting, and should be limited by the beginner until the artist has created safe and healthy habits. The most common and recommended artist solvent is an odorless mineral spirit, or OMS, produced from petroleum distillates. OMS is highly refined to contain lower aromatics, making it safer for indoor studio use. OMS is mainly used for cleaning brushes, palettes, palette knives, etc. But they should not be used to thin, blend, or dissolve natural resins, such as damar, copal, or mastic. The other most common solvent is turpentine, which is the classic artist solvent and the traditional brush and surface cleaner. Being distilled from pine resin, it has a synergy and compatibility with other natural resin-based mediums and varnishes. However, it has much higher aromatics and is considered toxic for indoor use, especially the cheaper, lower purified grades found in most hardware stores. You're right, it's not good. No problem, buddy. The newcomer should always purchase their solvents from an arts and crafts store. And yes, the highly refined OMSs are more money, but they are more prudent and safer for your studio use. So as you begin, just stick to odorless mineral spirits. And there are a number of good brands, from Weber's Terpenoid to Mona Lisa, with my favorite being Gamblin's Gamsol. Honestly, it seems like the sillier the name, the better the product. To properly house the solvent, the artist will require an airtight container, one with a large enough opening to clean your assortment of brushes. Make sure you stick to either glass or metal containers, avoiding plastic, styrofoam, and paper. The solvent will start to immediately eat its way through those materials. I recommend a container with a built-in agitator. For home studio use, I prefer this jar from Silicoil. The rounded spring agitator does a really good job cleaning the brush. Plus, it's very soft and kind to natural hairs. Also, agitators very helpfully separate the fallen dissolved paint from the solvent up top. And for plein air outdoor painting, I recommend an airtight metal container. Again, one with an agitator. And we will expand on this in our setup section of this video. But really, any airtight household container will do just fine, remembering to make it either metal or glass. As mentioned earlier, in the safety section of this video, we will go over good solvent habits, recycling, and disposal. When used with care, solvents are a useful and necessary tool for oil painting. However, many painters do limit their need and exposure to solvents by using more safe alternatives and/or by using artist oils to clean brushes and surfaces. Again, the natural and synthetic chemistry of oil painting can be very toxic. But being aware and knowledgeable from the start can set up for a lifetime of healthy painting. Now on to artist oils and mediums. These can be added to the paint, and at times the painting, to adjust the consistency, the drying time, and the sheen. Honestly, because of the sheer number of products and the possibilities of their applications, it's very important to understand their basic uses. So initially, think of them simplified into 3 categories: dryers, extenders, and thickeners. Let's begin with the extenders, or the artist oils. As the binder in oil paint, these extend and dilute the color, creating more transparency and fluidity. Also, they extend the drying time, allowing for more flexibility to mix, blend, and adjust. As mentioned earlier, there are several artist oils to choose from, all with the basic same properties, but with subtle differences. Linseed is the most common used artist oil, a good extender that creates a strong, durable film, but it can turn lighter color mixtures more yellow as it dries. The few things to note when picking an oil is the viscosity and the color of the oil. Some oils are thicker and darker, like sun-dried linseed and stand oil, while some oils are lighter and more watery, like a walnut oil. Bottom line, the more oil you add to your paint will change its consistency and color closer to the oil. Like we've said many times before, it's all your preference. Speaking of preference, a lot of painters use artist oils to clean their brushes, particularly walnut oil, to bypass the use of any harsh solvents. Again, in my brush cleaning video tutorial, I go through the process of how to clean your brushes with artist oils step by step.
Tisk tisk, Michael. This is starting to sound like a commercial for your brush cleaning video.
Okay guys, there's just a lot to go over. To recap, the addition of artist oils can be used in such diverse ways. Everything from the initial activation of a dry canvas to oiling out a dried painting for an even application of a final picture varnish. So which artist oil should you start out with? I recommend the classic linseed oil. However, if you'd also like to clean your brushes with an artist oil, I would suggest a walnut oil. Also making Da Vinci quite happy. I know, buddy. On to the dryers, which I use to categorize most of the liquid oil paint mediums. Just like the extenders, oil paint mediums extend the color, adding transparency and fluidity to the paint. However, unlike artist oils, they typically speed up the drying time, quite dramatically. The traditional mixture of an oil painting medium is composed of an oil, a gum turpentine, and a natural resin varnish. Oil paint mediums have long been held as one of the painter's trade secrets, adjusting the chemistry to meet their unique needs, and by doing so, manipulating the paint to create a signature look or to project a lustrous shine. The amazing American illustrator J.C. Leyendecker used a secret medium of an assortment of artist oils mixed with turpentines to help create his fluid, energetic mark-making and glossy look. And the seemingly heavenly glow of Dutch master painter Rembrandt can now be attributed to an oil blend including lead oxide and arsenic. By the way, that's not recommended for the beginner or even an intermediate painter. Okay, completely removing the lore and the legend. Very simply, a painter will mix oil mediums into their colors to quicken the drying time and to change the look and luster of the paint. This also makes most oil mediums perfect for color glazing, a wonderful and classic academic technique using thin and quick drying transparent washes to adjust the color of a dried painting. Also, most oil mediums can be used without color to oil out a dried painting, resaturating the dull colors underneath, acting as a temporary varnish. It seems like every company makes an oil paint medium, and some are making multiple variations of the same. So how does a new painter navigate all this? First, be aware of the texture and the viscosity of the medium. Some are thin like water, while others are thick like honey. Next, note the different sheens, from satin to semi-gloss to a high gloss finish. And finally, pay attention to the varying drying speeds. Some mediums dry super fast, while others take a little bit more time to cure. Personally, I recommend and use Winsor Newton's Liquin Original. It dries fast, but not super fast, and it adds a nice semi-gloss sheen. Applying liquid oils and mediums directly to the paint or on the palette is certainly doable in smaller amounts, but having a dedicated container really makes things easier. Just like before, stick to metal or glass, specifically for those solvent-based mediums. For myself, I use these larger metal palette cups. Most of them will clip securely to a wooden palette. or you can just use them off to the side on your flat studio glass palette. They come in varying sizes, and some come ready to travel with screw-on caps. Or just keep it super simple with a rededicated glass jar. In general, larger jars for more permanent storage, and smaller jars for more daily use. If you hadn't guessed by now, I would definitely start collecting glass jars, and in all sizes. Finally, the last of the three is thickeners. Very easily, these add body to the paint. Just like the extenders and the dryers, thickeners change the look and the feel of the paint, in addition to changing the sheen and the drying time. The traditional impasto medium is beeswax, but over the years, artists have added everything to their paint, from chalk to sand and even ground glass. So obviously, if the painter just wants thicker paint, they can always just add larger amounts of the color. However, certain pigments and mixtures don't dry as durably as others. Plus, the more paint you add, the longer it takes to dry. And good paint can cost a lot of money. Finally, most modern thickeners are made from petroleum distillates. Thus, they should be handled with care. But this allows for a huge diversity in textures, sheens, and drying times. So just like other oil mediums, if you choose to use a thickener, you'll have a plethora of options in today's market. Personally, I am very partial to Grumbacher Zec. It extends the color wonderfully, giving it great body, and it is super quick drying with more of a semi-gloss sheen. And the best part is, it smells like pine sol. Ah, the smell of clean. Absolutely, I should stop doing that. Okay, just so you know, in that 10-minute introduction, we barely scratched the surface of all the mediums that are out there and how to properly use them. But even then, I would recommend forgetting about 90% of what we covered. Don't get me wrong, mediums can be truly wonderful, and I use a number of them in my painting practice. However, they can only accent, embellish, or amplify what is already there. In other words, the core of oil painting comes from the paint and you. So I passionately recommend that you practice with just paint, for a while too, before you explore any of the painting mediums out there. Do take the time to learn what the paint can do first. Learn how it feels, how it moves, how it blends, mixes, builds, before you start to alter it. So as you become more comfortable, then you can start to experiment with the different chemistries that can amplify your signature style. Please pardon my directness, but I've seen way too many new painters create such bad habits and with it frustration, looking for a quick and easy fix. Myself included. So as you begin, use oils and mediums very sparingly, if at all. Get used to the paint first, and the surface you apply it to.
Says you, Michael. The Academy has all the secret recipes a new artist needs to achieve greatness.
You don't say. Are you watering? Thanks.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Are all my canvases draped on your head? Of course they are. Okay, let's do it. The traditional oil paint surfaces aren't as vast as paints and brushes. However, they do have their nuances. Focused around three archival materials: canvas, panel, and paper. Let's start off with canvas. Becoming common in the 16th century, it was used largely in European and American traditions. To ensure the proper rigid surface, the fabric canvas is typically stretched tight around a frame of stretcher bars. The stretcher bar is usually composed of a dried pine or spruce wood. It also has a milled beveled edge, to help stretch the canvas nice and tight. This also helps the canvas have a clean, floating surface, unencumbered by any obstructions from underneath. Artist canvas falls into two more categories: cotton duck canvas and linen canvas. Beginning with cotton duck. Being made from the cotton plant, it is composed of a very dense weaving of fibers. Cotton duck is the main fabric used for the majority of pre-made canvases on the market. This fabric can range in durability, and with it the cost. The heavier the weight with a denser weave, the stronger the canvas, but also the more expensive. However, compared to linen canvas, it is still far cheaper. Meanwhile, the linen canvas is geared more toward the professional. With the fibers being developed from flax, it is usually much more durable and rigid than cotton duck canvas. It also has the history and rich tradition of being the oil painting canvas of the European masters. Because it is so laborious to produce and most of the raw material is harvested in Europe, linen canvas is much more expensive than cotton canvas. I mean much more expensive. No, seriously, here, take a look. Much more expensive. Is it worth the price difference? For some artists, absolutely. But for the beginner, just stay with cotton duck canvases. Up next is the panel board. Most modern panels are created from a tempered hardboard, allowing them to be thin yet very sturdy. Traditional wood panels were made from either a birch or a poplar. Before the 16th century, wood panels were the preferred substrate for oil painting. The solid, smooth surface made it ideal for the application, and the durability really helped with the longevity of the painting. Exampled beautifully by Da Vinci's Mona Lisa. Being painted on a panel of white poplar, that painting has stood the test of time. I mean, what is she, like over 500 years old?
Wow.
Oops, sorry. You look great.
Rude.
Not a day over 400. Yikes. And finally, there's paper. And not that cheap, flimsy computer paper. Oil painting requires a much heavier stock, starting around 90 pounds and going up from there. Today, most fine art papers are made from 100% cotton. And dedicated oil painting paper is referred to as canvas paper, frequently having an embossed canvas-like texture and already being primed. This is easily the fastest and cheapest way to start an oil painting. Speaking of, oil painting substrates are consistently primed for a few reasons. Reason number 1, protection. Very simply, priming protects the substrate from rotting by sealing the surface and forcing the media to sit on top, not allowing it to sink into the fibers below. Oil painting, including the various oils, mediums, and solvents, is very acidic and instantly starts to deteriorate a surface. Reason number 2, consistency. Priming gives the artist an even ground to work on, while overall brightening the colors and avoiding any duller areas in the finished product. There are a few main primers used in contemporary painting: acrylic gesso, a PVA size, and a traditional rabbit skin glue. Acrylic gesso is the most common used primer today, typically using a mixture of acrylic polymers, white pigment, and chalk. This creates a more rigid yet somewhat flexible surface, and being water-based, it's more user-friendly overall. Next is PVA size, or polyvinyl acetate. This contemporary hide glue replacement provides a stable and archival layer, sealing the surface and protecting it from moisture. It is virtually colorless and is easier to apply by being more thin and watery than gesso. Finally, there is the traditional animal hide glue, rabbit skin glue. Similar to PVA size, however, it may not be as archival because it allows for more moisture to pass through. But it creates a far more rigid surface than PVA glue and it has a very special synergy with linen canvas. Most modern pre-made surfaces are already primed and ready to go. But can you use oil paint on a non-primed surface? The quick answer is yes. French master artist Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec painted many of his impressionistic snapshots very quickly, routinely using an oil paint mixture heavily diluted with turpentine on an unprimed cardboard. Thus, the paint layers would dry very rapidly, allowing him to continually layer his flowing sketches, helping him create magnificent vitality and energy. And again, Irish-British painter Francis Bacon started using the unprimed side of his older canvases after losing all of his money in Monte Carlo, later confessing that the raw canvas fit his painting techniques far better and became his permanent surface of choice, thus proving that the feel of the surface is hugely important to the painter's success. So let's now explore the feel of the substrates discussed earlier. Up first, prime canvas creates a quicker surface, with enough drag that it allows the painter to slow down and be more intentional. Because it's sealed, the surface will blend very well, but it will always show a bit of the fabric weave from below. Primed panel is the fastest because it's the most even surface, with little to no drag, allowing the painter seemingly unlimited brush movement and freedom. And it blends so well, it almost completely erases all the initial brush marks and textures. Finally, prime paper acts a lot like raw canvas with a highly absorbent ground, forcing the artist to use more paint while dramatically slowing down the surface. This causes the initial mark making to almost be permanently made and very difficult to blend or lift away. Always keep in the back of your mind that the experience of oil painting is mostly determined by the interaction of the paint and the surface. So never be afraid to experiment and explore with materials. The feel they produce is key. Personally, I don't like the give and bounce of fabric canvas, and I despise the texture and the roughness of canvas paper. But I love the feel, the tempo, and the touch of gessoed hardboard. Honestly, the smoother the better. But a super fast surface when you first start can be very difficult to control. So my recommendation when you begin is to use primed canvas boards. You will get to play with the texture of cotton canvas while enjoying the rigidity of the board. And you can normally buy a lot of them without a huge investment. And the best part is they are so easy to store. Storing your paintings is rarely discussed when you're first getting started, but it quickly becomes a burden the more you produce. The small footprint of canvas boards makes them easily stackable, hiding them effortlessly in a drawer, or even fitting them comfortably into a milk crate. But don't take my word for it, just look at all this clutter from my larger stretch canvases. Oh, darn, where did that footage go? Oh well. Anyway, if you'd like to learn more about making your own canvases, also linked in the description is my step-by-step tutorial demonstrating how to build, stretch, and prime an artist canvas. It's easier than you think. A couple quick final thoughts on oil painting substrates. First off, relax. This is a lot to take in. Learning good material practices will take some time, as will getting to know your surface preferences. It is by far more important to paint and paint a lot, rather to concern yourself too much with the quality and archival longevity of the substrate. Meaning, initially, you're going to make some paintings you may not want to keep forever. And again, it takes a few paintings to gain a competency. So until you get there, I would recommend investing in a lot of simple surfaces rather than a few fancy ones. And I do mean simple. Personally, I have primed countless sheets of drawing and newsprint paper in my day. And as you dedicate yourself to your craft, before you know it, you'll be so specific that you'll be making all of your own canvases. Or maybe you'll be painting so much you don't even know what you're painting on half the time. Just allow yourself the grace and patience to learn and hone your skills. Now it's time for the easels. Let's get that painting out of the way. And the maul stick too. Excellent. There's my trusty studio easel. I have had that for a long time. Easels are really synonymous with painting. But what constitutes an easel? Basically, it's a frame to hold your artwork while it's being created. Honestly, this can be done so many different ways, and there are a ton of easels out there. As we go over the basic setups, I'll discuss the pros and cons for each. But why are easels upright? Can't I just work on a flat table? Very quickly, the artist requires the angle of the artwork to match the angle of the eye. Just like when you're taking a photo, this helps avoid any visual distortion, which very often a beginner might confuse for a lack of an ability. And it helps create good posture, hopefully avoiding any physical strain. And thank you, Scully, for the help. Easels can be organized into 3 simple categories: studio or floor standing, tabletop, and plein air or travel. A studio easel is generally the biggest. It's designed to hold medium to larger scale works, and is usually built in either a wood or a metal like aluminum. Studio easels typically come in 3 basic constructions: single mast, A-frame, and H-frame. Single mast and most A-frame easels function virtually the same, with a single leg stand holding them upright. This allows them to be lighter with a much smaller studio footprint. And because of that single leg stand, they are much easier to fold up for better storage. However, that design makes them a little bit more unstable. With only one vertical support, wider substrates are not properly balanced and securely held in. This allows for the dreaded canvas wobble. Thus, single mast easels function better with smaller to medium substrates, particularly when they're oriented vertically. Meanwhile, an A-frame easel with its 3-legged construction further stabilizes the frame. Plus, the additional bookend vertical supports help securely hold larger and, more importantly, wider frames. Continuing the easel evolution, the H-frame construction is far more rigid and sturdier, capable of holding much larger paintings due to the extra bookend vertical supports and the double leg stand. Because of this, they are consistently more expensive than an A-frame and especially a single mast. However, they can get quite big and heavy, with an ever-increasing footprint. And the larger they go, the more they start to resemble a medieval torture device. What? It's true. It looks that way. Next up, the tabletop easel. Again constructed in either wood or metal, and usually coming in an A-frame, single mast, and an H-frame. These are meant to sit on top of a table or really any flat surface, allowing the artist to sit and still work upright, while considerably reducing the larger setup of the bigger studio easels. And most are only able to accommodate smaller canvases, probably around 20 inches or less. But a lot of them do have these great drawers for storage. Ooh-wee, the organization. Finally, there are plein air or outdoor travel easels. And just like the previous 2 categories, they also span a variety of builds, weights, and materials. The travel easel stresses portability, with some being super streamlined and minimal, while others have compartment after compartment to help manage and organize your travel art supplies. Being made for mobility, plein air easels are designed to hold smaller to more medium-sized artworks. And each easel has its own strict size limit. What's great is that many travel easels can function as a hybrid, partially unfolding to a tabletop easel and fully expanding to a standing studio easel that can be, of course, used outdoors, but also inside the studio. Like everything in art and painting, it's all about meeting your own personal needs and preferences. So then, how do you go about choosing your own easel? Or if you even want one at all? First, consider what do you want to paint and the scale of the painting. Second, where do you want to paint? Indoor? Outdoor? And also consider, would you like to be standing or sitting? And third, this one's key, how much are you wanting to spend? Easels are no different from any other material. You can find them for quite cheap, and you can find them for so much money. What are we buying, a boat? Yikes. As I have said many times in this video, learning your needs and wants will take some time. So it is so important to start off really minimally. Then after you start to understand your own practice, you can expand from there. For most, the best initial investment should probably be in a tabletop easel. However, if you know you want to paint outdoors, then of course the clear recommendation is a plein air easel. As we have mentioned earlier, it can also function as a studio easel and a tabletop easel. The general setup of your studio really comes down to two things: how much space you have to dedicate to it, and also your budget. Please don't get caught up in the bigger, better, and more scenario, and always remember that the equipment doesn't make the painter. Honestly, there are a lot of very simple and no-cost solutions that actually can work out a lot better. Speaking of, let's just jump straight into studio setup. Now, setting up your own artist workspace is a balance of needs, wants, and practicality. Please remember, there's not one way to do this, and preferences always seem to outweigh functionality. Let's get this out of the way first. You will not need as much space as you think you will. And your setup can literally be anywhere, from a garage to a spare bedroom, to just a few feet on a table, or even on the floor. The ultimate goal is to have a consistent, dedicated area for creating. A dedicated art space really does help solidify good habits, thoughtful patterns, and discipline in your painting practice. Because a dedicated art space, however small it may be, isn't just a storage area for your art supplies, but rather it's a portal to your creativity and your passion. Beyond the equipment we have already gone over, mainly you will need a functioning surface, i.e. a table, to house and hold your working materials, such as your palette, paints, and brushes. For myself, I use a rolling table, converted from an older drafting table and an even older TV stand. Pop some wheels on it and you have yourself an artist tabaret. The traditional artist table and storage cabinet, tabarets can get quite expensive, rather large and outright heavy when buying them officially. If you're not into converting old tables, I would simply recommend folding trays. The world of folding trays is surprisingly wide, and in comparison are far easier on the wallet, much more convenient to move around, and can fold up for more efficient storage. Really, you don't need anything fancy. Tables are everywhere. Look, there's a table. See? Table. Or as we discussed earlier, setting up on a table to begin with takes care of that surface need altogether. And don't forget, a lot of tabletop easels already come with storage drawers to help organize your initial supplies. And some drawers can quickly become a table to rest a palette. As you grow and accumulate supplies, storage becomes an issue. But initially, you shouldn't need that much. Rolling trays like this one are an effective use of space, and they're mobile. I really do love wheels. Personally, I like these plastic drawers. They are cheaper, fairly sturdy, and they come in a variety of shapes and sizes. However, the heavier you make the drawers, the less they want to work. Alright, we're on camera. Let's close this. Maybe I don't like these. Anyway, they're fine. But really, any kind of toolbox or storage bin works really well, specifically if your setup will be moving around. I would recommend starting small. You can always go bigger. One of the best and easiest setups is to simply use a wall for your easel. Sink a couple of screws, and you have an instant easel. And not to mention, this one doesn't cost any money whatsoever. However, if you'd like to protect that wall first, you can always put up a plastic tarp or a painter's plastic. The thicker the better. And if you really don't want to buy an easel, nor damage a wall, it's back to our trusty bucket, with a large wooden backing board can easily save the day. And don't forget the plastic tarp or drop cloth to protect that floor. Paint always goes everywhere, no matter how careful you are. Incidentally, using the floor as your table and a seat really can work out great for painting. I did that a ton through college. And seating in general is really just about preference. A lot of painters love a rolling stool to slide across the studio. Personally, I like a little bit of a bigger chair with more back support. But at the very least, I would recommend a chair that can extend quite tall. The added height will allow you to position yourself properly. When learning good habits, you always want to make sure that your eye level is at least at the halfway point to 2/3 of the overall height of the canvas. This will hopefully again help you avoid any subtle visual distortions. To support a correct visual awareness or to simply maintain energy, many artists favor standing over sitting, which has always been the preferred stance traditionally and in most academic settings. But as always, it's all about your comfort and perfect posture. Finally, let's discuss lighting. The artist requires good, clean light to see and create properly. Good news, the best lighting is free and it comes from an open window. Natural, clear, midday light reveals all. And did I mention it's free? Free or not, normally avoid any direct light on your paintings. The glare will easily oversaturate and overwhelm. Always situate your workspace out of the direct path for good indirect illumination. In regards to light bulbs, the best equivalent would be a full spectrum or a 5000K bulb. Full spectrum bulbs can be quite expensive. However, most 5000K bulbs, either LED or compact fluorescence, are very, very reasonable. The K in 5000K refers to Kelvin, or the temperature or color of the light. 5000K is as close to pure white light as you can buy. Anything lower will get warmer and more orange, like a 3000K soft white light bulb. And anything higher gets more blue and cooler, like a daylight 7000K bulb.
You're giving away a little bit too much information in this video. Stop turning the lights off like that.
A note on basic color theory. Everything that is illuminated by a light source will be defined by that light source, in both dominant color and value. Translation: an orange dominant light will shift all the colors toward orange. thus optically transforming and changing your perception of all the original colors. So it is very important to have a white, full-spectrum light when creating. Now, how and where should you arrange your lighting? First, directly overhead works really well. I buy 60 to 100 watt equivalent bulbs and I place them in my overhead light fixture. Or you can use a light stand. This one has a diffuser to dissipate any direct lighting. When using a can light, make sure you avoid any direct lighting creating hotspots. A couple quick strategies is to cross-light your painting with 2 lights. Each light is beamed directly across to the opposite side to avoid any direct glare where you may be sitting and painting. Or simply turn the lights away and illuminate the surrounding area. I project my strongest lights, about 150 watt equivalent, toward the ceiling, softening the illumination for the whole room. But again, please don't panic. You don't have to buy any expensive lighting kits when you begin. Most basic professional lighting kits take up a lot of floor space and are quite cumbersome. But in reality, light stands are everywhere. I have used floor lights like these from big box stores for years, well into my professional painting career. They work great. If you're working with very limited floor space or none at all, you can always get a basic clip light from your local hardware store. In fact, these are awesome and they're so helpful. Bottom line, good light equals good painting. Very simply, you have to see what it is you're doing. And personally, I take that thought to the extreme and I light my studio like the sun. That's so bright. Way too many lights. You don't need this many lights. Maybe 1 or 2, but this is getting ridiculous. Anyway, a few quick notes on setups. Please do not immediately run out and buy a lot of expensive stuff that you honestly don't need and maybe won't even know how to fully utilize. As we have already discussed numerous times, buying an abundance of extra things won't make you a better painter. But please make do with what you already have around you. So many everyday objects work out amazingly well. And most professionals I know are always retrofitting, adapting, and building onto the items that they either already possess or that they can find for really cheap. So let your current best friend know that your local thrift store will soon be your best friend, if it already isn't. The honest point of this section is really visual. Being able to visualize your practice and how best to utilize your space, like everything else, takes time. Thus, by observing other painters who are further along on the artistic journey is both beneficial and inspiring. Seeing how and where your artistic heroes create can help you solve everything from a basic setup issue to solidifying your aspirations, or to give you that romantic kick in the butt to achieve a dream, your dream. Remember, this is your zone to create. Make it your own. Before discussing safety, there are a few miscellaneous items that I would recommend for your setup. Not to worry, I'll go fast. It's almost Odie's food time. I said almost, pal, almost. First, do yourself a favor and get yourself a pair of small pliers. Paint tubes that haven't been used in a while tend to dry completely shut. And for some reason, the artist instinct is to always use our teeth. Never, ever use your teeth to open up a paint tube. You only get one set of adult teeth. Really do take care of them. Next, store-bought paper towels, they stink. They tear, they shed, and they absorb very little of the paint and the solvent. And yes, you can buy expensive paper towels, but at that point, just invest in very heavy-duty, lint-free shop rags. Yes, they're more expensive, but the difference while painting is so noticeable. But the best is to actually use real cotton cloth rags. Personally, I tear down and reuse all my old undershirts, socks, and underwear. I'm just kidding. Not underwear. I've never used underwear. Yes, I use my underwear, but for underwear, not for painting. For painting, just the socks and the shirts. Everything's fine. Everything's good. Let's move on.
Yikes.
Finally, the maul stick, a painter's secret weapon. A maul stick isn't just a wooden dowel, it really is a stabilizing bridge, successfully balancing the artist over wet paint, while allowing for that extra brush control. Thus, it really is a secret weapon for details and refinements. If you'd like to learn more about how to make and use your own maul stick, I have already made a 90s infomercial themed how-to tutorial, and yes, the link is in the description. I know, there's a lot of links in that description, but they are all labeled, I promise.
Michael, you're sounding a little goofy. It might be time to feed the dog and go to bed.
No, I'm good, I'm fine, let's keep going.
No, take a moment. Now's actually the perfect time to promote our print shop. So, if you'd like to help support the channel and pick up some of Michael's non-Academy approved artwork, we are offering limited edition archival artist prints of several of his more acceptable artworks. Each print is hand-numbered, titled, and signed by Michael. And all prints are professionally produced using Academy-approved archival inks on heavy acid-free stock. Please take a moment and visit michaeljohnnolan.com and click on prints to select yours today, or 2 prints, or 3, but not 4. He's not good enough for 4. The link to the print shop is also in the description. And while you're at it, make sure you smash that like button and subscribe to the channel.
Hey, don't pester them. They can subscribe if they want to.
Quiet, Michael, you are terrible at marketing. And if they've already watched this far, they should subscribe. Anyway, now back to the show.
Alright, it's finally time for safety. Not the most fun topic, but maybe the most important one. As I have said numerous times, learning oil painting, including all of its chemistries, takes time. So as you begin, have a mindset of careful reverence. Being aware leads to good and safe habits. So let's begin with the awarenesses. Then we can move on to the simple actions and solutions that will hopefully set up a lifetime of healthy and enjoyable oil painting. Oil painting is like everything else. It's all about limiting possible exposures. Just keep in mind the old saying, too much of anything can kill you. A generalized phrase commonly attributed to Mark Twain, who supposedly followed it with, but too much good whiskey is barely enough. Well said, Mark. Well said. Anyway, no oil paint, nor solvent, or oil is entirely non-toxic, and all should be handled thoughtfully. As we discussed earlier in the video, oil paint mixtures can vary in both quality and ingredients. Many colors, especially in higher-end paints, can be mixed with various heavy metals, which can act as a color stabilizer or a color amplifier, increasing durability and can help the paint dry faster. For instance, some rare and traditional mixtures of white and yellow can contain lead, while many artist-grade vibrant yellows, oranges, and reds can contain cadmium. And a number of greens, violets, and blues are mixed with cobalt. Yes, over time, heavy metals accumulate in the body and can cause a host of serious illnesses. But even colors that were once deemed safe, like titanium dioxide, has recently been classified as a carcinogen. Sigh. But this isn't just an issue for oil painting. Time and time again, these pigments are used in all fine art paints, including watercolor and acrylic. Bottom line, good handling practices should be done with all paints. Obviously, you'll want to avoid any prolonged skin contact, any inhalation, or ingestion of these paints, especially the ones with heavy metals. And you wouldn't think I'd have to mention that. I'm looking at you, Vinny. Again, some simple solutions. Wash your hands and wash them frequently, with hot water and an oil-dissolving soap. However, that can be quite harsh on your skin, so if you can stand them, wear latex or nitrile disposable gloves. This will ensure that you'll always be protected and you can be a bit more casual. Finally, as a beginner, just avoid the more toxic paints until you've created good handling practices. In fact, many professional artists and institutions are going cadmium-free. There are just so many safer alternatives out there. But remember, today's safer paint alternatives could maybe become tomorrow's toxic enemy. Back in the day, to avoid using lead, paint manufacturers turned to cadmium as a safer alternative. And now that's being replaced. Again, regardless of the paint, always display a careful reverence for what you're doing and using. Let's head back to solvents. Again, the beginner and the indoor studio artist should be using an artist-grade odorless mineral spirit. Before we go any further, make sure you always read the labels, health warnings, and procedures of all the products you buy and use. And as you can see here, again, avoid any prolonged skin contact, ingestion, or inhalation. Odorless mineral spirits, unlike the name would suggest, still release a reduced but harmful and combustible vapor. They are not entirely odorless nor non-toxic. So when working with solvents of any kind, please don't use them to clean your hands or wipe down your skin. Again, just use hot water and soap or wear gloves and avoid the issue entirely. Make sure you are always covering or recapping your solvents when not in use. This simple step instantly reduces vapors from either being inhaled or evaporating in your environment and releasing VOCs. Okay, it's VOC time, or volatile organic compounds. Exposure to VOCs can cause a range of health effects, including eye, nose, and throat irritation, headaches, nausea, and difficulty breathing. Just keep in mind that almost everything in our modern environment will off-gas some level of VOC, from furniture to carpet, and electronics to wall paint. Oil paints, oils, solvents, solvent-based mediums, they all release different levels of VOCs into your environment. Consistently with these products, the stronger the smell, the more it can affect you. So always pay attention to how you feel, and if you're ever lightheaded, get outside and get some fresh air. And that's the key. Good airflow is very important to properly dissipate the smell and with it the possible nasty vapors. Some simple solutions. Very easily work in a space with good airflow. If you have the option, run the fan or the exhaust on your central air unit. The simplest solution is to open up a window. It's free and by far the best. As always, weather permitting. Because I'm based in the desert, it gets a little hot, and opening the window isn't always an option. Personally, I invested in an air purifier with a large carbon filter to help remove any VOCs from the environment. However, nothing is better than fresh air or simply limiting the exposure to begin with. And anything with a super strong odor, like a solvent-based varnish. I always use outside with as much fresh air as possible and a vapor respirator. Also, when dealing with varnishes, always wear gloves and maybe some goggles. Because this video is a foundation oil painting introduction, we won't be going over the process or materials of varnishing. But just in case you are interested in learning about varnishing, I already have a step-by-step varnishing tutorial. Okay guys, I get it. And yes, the link is in the description. Okay. Remember, VOCs are very common, and you always want to limit your exposure. Trust your nose and trust how you feel. But the good news is that most oil paint itself releases very little VOCs, or releases them very slowly as the oil paint dries. However, it's the solvents, mediums, and varnishes that do need to be very limited for indoor use. Again, read all warnings and directions on the manufacturer's label. And if you are looking for more info on the material, I would encourage you to download the Material Safety Data Sheet associated with the product, or MSDS. Those are usually found through the company's website and are typically way more thorough than the label. Finally, it would behoove you to avoid any food or open drinks around your painting setup. I know, what a buzzkill. Right, Mark? Oil paint, no matter how careful you are, will always get on everything around you. Plus, food and drinks can easily absorb chemical vapors and dusts, becoming contaminated. And the longer it's there, the more it will accumulate. A few quick notes on safe storage and disposal. First and foremost, make sure everything after its use is capped properly. If the original container is damaged, transfer it to another airtight container. I told you those jars would come in handy. And please, always label the contents. If an oil paint tube breaks or rips, there are open replacement tubes that you can purchase. Just pour the old paint in, and then seal it up from the bottom. There, good as new. In comparison, they are super cheap and are really convenient to always have around. And don't forget to label. Place all of the combustible solvents and oils out of any high heat areas, while avoiding any direct sunlight, heat sources, or sparks. And if you want to be super cautious and you have the extra space, a small fire cabinet is the safest storage for all of your combustible items. To help extend your colors already out on your palette, and to cut back on the odors they create after a session, you can cover your palette with a plastic wrap, or put your whole palette into an airtight container like this one from Masterson. Now the most overlooked safety concern, the oily rag. Cloth or paper rags oversaturated with oil paint, oils, or solvents can spontaneously combust. As the oil dries on the rag, it produces heat, and if that heat gets trapped, it could ignite. However, good and safe practices will all but eliminate this from ever happening. First, here's what not to do. Do not oversaturate any rag or cloth with oil paint, oils, or solvents. Do not leave an oily rag tightly bunched up. The heat generated by oxidation needs to be properly dissipated. So then don't toss an oily rag onto a pile of other rags or cram it into a packed trash can. Do not place in a hot environment or next to a heat source or anything that could create sparks. Remember, it is highly combustible until dry. That also means to again avoid any prolonged direct sunlight. Now what you should do. Do leave a used rag spread out nice and flat in a well-ventilated space and allow it to dry. Depending on weather, by placing the rag outside will also help with the odor and vapors. If you would like to be super safe and limit any odors, do store an oily rag in a fire-safe metal container. This type of container doesn't prevent a possible ignition. However, it will hope to contain any fire that could happen. So remember to not tightly bunch up the rags in the container. Also, the self-closing lid will help limit any odors or vapors from sneaking out. Please keep in mind, this is not common. And in all my years making and teaching art, I have never heard of this happening. However, it still can happen. And on average, oily rags start around 900 home fires a year in the US alone. This leads us to the safe disposal of these materials. Oil paints, oils, and solvents are considered hazardous waste and harmful to the environment. Thus, they should not be thrown out with the regular trash, nor poured down the sink, or dumped anywhere outside. And in many US states, doing so could be illegal. The best practice is to take your oil painting waste to a hazardous collection site or event. Not to worry, finding your local disposal site is really just a quick internet search or phone call to your local officials. So I do my best to collect all this detritus. I wait for any of my unused oil paint to dry, then I place the scrapings in a cap jar. After all the paint rags are filled up and fully dry, I bag those up for collection too. And as for the odorless mineral spirits, I try to recycle and reuse those for as long as I can. Not just for the environment, but also that stuff is really expensive, and it can save you a small fortune reusing it. So if you're interested in how to clean and reuse your dirty solvents, I have a quick video tutorial themed like a 50s PSA already made on how to do that. And yes, the link is in the description. Michael, I wouldn't eat that. Oh, this must be a long video. Now I'm talking to myself. Anyway, as promised, let's go over a few foundational color palettes that you might want to explore. But first, learning color theory, color mixing, and color palettes, again like everything else, takes time. Thus, this section is not meant as a full explanation, but rather as an introduction and an initial starting point. The entrance into color can be quite overwhelming. There are just so many pigments, concepts, combinations, and applications. So it is best to be purposeful and minimal when just beginning. For this reason, start with a monochromatic palette. Mono means one and chroma means color. The concept works with really any hue, but for practical purposes, begin with the combination of a darker color plus titanium white. For our darker color, I'd recommend ivory black. It's one of the darkest colors, but also it'll work for our other color palettes as well. The ivory black and white will allow the artist to focus on the creation of a full, complete value range, which is pivotal for convincing depth, solid forms, and general atmosphere. In addition, this palette will introduce the beginner to basic mixing, blending and other brush techniques, and becoming more aware of the surface, including opacity and transparency. Ultimately, working with the light and dark of a single hue will allow you to just play, becoming more comfortable with the media without the added variables of mixing multiple colors and temperatures. A monochromatic palette is really a great transition into oil painting from drawing. Now on to color mixing. Initially, stick to your primary color scheme of red, yellow, blue. This scheme provides a wonderful foundation of mixing theory while intentionally limiting your colors. And limiting colors in general is key to your understanding, but it also aids in creating a color unity or cohesion with your palette. To ease yourself into color mixing and neutralization, Start off with a muted version of a primary palette. Personally, I love the Zorn palette for this. Based on the artist Anders Zorn, the modern Zorn palette consists of a titanium white, an ivory black, which will act as the blue, so we get to reuse our monochromatic palette, and the additions of vermilion red, I'd go for the hue, and a yellow ochre. These four colors together create a very limited and a very warm, earthy color range. So for the beginner, it has a much more gentle and controlled instruction to learn how to neutralize and mix color. Simply put, the narrow saturated color range really only allows you to make intense oranges, while mixing very weak and desaturated greens, not to mention mixing the most limited and hard to see violets. In fact, the only way you can really see those violet grays is to add some white to help lighten and cool down the heat of the red. Without a strong and vibrant blue, the palette's color range is extremely limited. But this limitation was quite intentional. It was arranged to effectively capture more neutral earthy objects under a warmer light source. If you would like to learn more about this combination, I already have a comprehensive tutorial explaining the what, the why, and the how-to of using the Zorn palette. And yes, as always, the link is in the description. After playing with a more muted primary scheme, now it's time to flip the script and try a much more intense primary scheme. There are several main colors that can make up an intense primary combination, all possessing varying qualities. But for the beginning painter, I prefer a saturated set that is slightly subdued to help ease the learning of color mixing and for better general color control. This set includes alizarin crimson as the red, a lemon yellow as the yellow, and a cerulean blue hue as the blue. Don't forget your titanium white and ivory black to help aid in neutralization and value creation. This palette is far more intense and further reaching than the Zorn palette, which means the artist can capture a much wider variety of subjects and genres. However, it is because of those intense saturations that this palette is much harder to neutralize and to create those more muted colors. After experimenting with both the muted and intense primaries, join them together to create a larger, more thorough co-primary palette. Co-primary just means having two varying primary colors for each primary concept. In other words, 2 yellows, 2 reds, and 2 blues. This is also referred to as a warm and cool primary. Thus, for our co-primary version, we will have a lemon yellow and a yellow ochre for the yellows, a vermilion red hue and alizarin crimson for the reds, and a cerulean blue hue, paired with our last color addition of an ultramarine blue as our blues. The ultramarine will add dark transparent depth to the palette, in addition to helping solidify those violets. This larger combination gives you the best of both worlds, being able to recreate intense colors and being able to focus on more muted earth tones. Now, while this palette is thorough, it still has its limitations. What this color combination lacks in overall color intensity, it makes up for in being more user-friendly and more subtle in its mixings and color neutralizations. What you will soon learn is that there is no one perfect color palette or combination of colors that works for everything effectively. Color palettes can be constructed with a greater saturation of the hues to easily create more intense, wide-ranging colors. Or they can be more focused, specific, and limited, like the Zorn palette. or simply just arranged out of the convenience and preferences of an individual artist. Each variation or palette will have their own benefits and challenges, and it's through the challenges to force the artist to see the limitations. Again, by limiting your colors, you learn what each color can do, and more importantly, what they can't do. So please, don't add too many colors too quickly. That's a recipe for frustration and bad habits. So just take your time, have fun, play, explore. Trust me, you'll get the hang of this faster than you think you will. So let's recap my recommendation for your first batch of colors: titanium white, lemon yellow, yellow ochre, vermilion red, make sure it's the hue, alizarin crimson, cerulean blue hue, ultramarine blue or French ultramarine blue, and ivory black. So that's a total of only 8 colors, spread across 4 introductory color palettes to play with. And to my more established painters, please jump into the comments with the colors and the palettes that you'd recommend for the beginning color mixologist. Finally, do yourself a huge favor and pick up a color wheel. This will help you cement each color's visual placement, navigating you on how to mix additional hues and how to neutralize intensities, while informing you on more foundational color concepts. I always have one in the studio ready to go, or 2, or 3, but not 4. 4 is just too many.
See, now you've got it, Michael.
I guess I can be trained. Well, we are finally here, the last section. Let's go over a few foundational painting techniques and some introductory painting ideas or subjects that you might want to explore. Excuse me, Scully. Would you mind holding this for me? Thanks, buddy. To start off, keep it simple. Learn the touch and the feel of the media through the imprimatura technique. This is a classic academic initial drawing layer. By using a single darker oil paint color, thinly draw out and compose your idea, establishing proportions, finding the lights and darks, and planning out the design. There's no white paint in this technique, just your darker color and the brightness of the surface. This initial sketch will build the foundation upon which all future painting layers will be constructed. And guess what? My very first video tutorial goes over this method step by step, so click that link in the description and give it a go. This technique really does produce a beautiful overall look with a wonderful energy. But please, when first beginning, do not concern yourself with the exact traditions of the imprimatura. Think of it as just a drawing, a wet drawing, but a drawing nonetheless. And it's through that wet drawing that you can start your transition into oil painting. Oops, let me get that for you. Thanks again, Scully. So what should you paint? Well, I would keep it simple. In foundational academic training, we typically focus on painting from observation at the beginning, teaching the artist to see through the sight measuring of simple forms, and thus learning to draw is just a byproduct of that awareness. Drum roll, please. Everyone, put your hands together for the classic still life.
Oh no, not another one of those. Oh, they're so boring.
Hey,
Nope, those are dumb.
when starting off, boring is good. Begin with a simple, well-lit single object. Remember, this subject matter isn't meant to be wildly entertaining. It's meant for you to get used to the material and better at drawing. Try several single object still lifes in the imprimatura technique before adding more complexity. Like I said earlier, keep these paintings simple. Learning art is all about repetition. So, multiple, quicker, smaller studies are much more beneficial rather than one or two belabored larger paintings. A quick side note. Honestly, painting a simple bottle like we have here is actually quite difficult to draw. Recreating a tall, symmetrical object will teach you a lot about where you are as a drawer. And I wish drawing straight lines were easy. Anyway, when this technique starts to feel slightly redundant, now it's time to add a tube of titanium white and try a full monochromatic painting. For a smooth and yet traditional transition, start your monochromatic with an imprimatura layer to establish the drawing. After it dries to the touch, then apply the opaque values on top. Modern-day monochromatic painting comes from the long-standing academic tradition of the grisaille technique. And you guessed it, my second video is a step-by-step tutorial going over the grisaille method, demonstrating how to mix the values and how to apply the paint. And absolutely, that link is sitting in the description. Wow, I've said that a lot. The grisaille was used as a foundation underpainting layer. By using an opaque white mixed with our ivory black, the artist is able to achieve a full value range, resolving volume while solidifying forms and depth. And just like we said before with the imprimatura, initially don't be too concerned with its proper techniques and process. Think of the grisaille technique as more of a rendered full drawing, pushing your brushwork, blending, creation of light and shadows, etc. Again, like we discussed before, I would try several smaller paintings in this method before moving on, focusing on simple, uncomplicated objects, bathed in good light that creates deep, dark shadows, allowing you to see and focus on the shapes. Painting is all about the shapes. Speaking of simple subject matter and quicker painted studies, painting wrinkled fabric is just not that. Actually, it can be quite complicated and very time-consuming. Anyway, just like the vertical symmetry of the bottle, focus on the fabric's larger abstracted shapes of light and shadow to help solve its riddle. There, done. Remember, simple is not wrinkled fabric. Write that down. Seriously, write that down. By the way, a helpful tip. When working monochromatically, take a photo of your subject matter and then convert it to black and white. Learning to see colors as values takes time, so just force the awareness and make it a whole lot easier on yourself. Once you become more comfortable moving around and drawing with the paint, now it's time to add in a few more colors with the Zorn palette. Again, please watch my full Zorn explanation and how-to tutorial for all the color mixing details. But here's a quick walkthrough of the painting process. Start with an imprimatura drawing, then let it dry to touch. Now using the Zorn palette, mix and paint an underpainting layer, roughly blocking in shapes of colors and values, staying away from details. Again, let that layer dry to touch. Finally, mix your colors one more time for the finishing layer. Here you will focus on fully resolving the forms, adding in those details, and creating a sense of space. By starting your initial paintings through dried layers, this allows the artist to purposely learn painting in stages. First, setting up the drawing. Second, establishing the forms. And third, creating all those details and resolving the finish. This will help the beginner visualize a process of development as they are becoming more comfortable with painting. At the same time, building through layers is also a classic approach, adhering to the chemistry of oil painting. Initial layers should be of a thinner application of oil and paint, while subsequent layers can become progressively thicker with more oil and paint. This concept is called fat over lean, and it helps ensure a more flexible and durable paint film, reducing cracking as the painting fully dries and ages over time. In other words, initially paint thinner, and as you develop the painting, you can paint thicker and thicker. Besides chemistry, thicker paint should really just be avoided when initially setting up a painting, particularly when first learning. It is much harder to control, blend, and build upon than a thinner application. After the completion of a few Zorn paintings, go ahead and try out your intense primary palette. Also, change up your subject matter. Get outside of the studio, explore nature, and paint a few landscapes. Set up for some portraits, and maybe the time-honored traditional self-portrait. It's an artistic rite of passage, and totally overdone, but necessary. And please, sneak yourself into some abstracts. For instance, after painting another observational study, if there's any paint remaining on my palette, I love to take it and just play, creating a loose, abstract design, focusing on the colors and the textures. Honestly, just to have some fun, especially if the study I was making didn't turn out the way I wanted. Whew, this is a little ugly. I'll keep working on it. One more demo to go. This leads us perfectly into the more flowing and energetic method of the alla prima. Also known as wet-on-wet painting, the alla prima approach is where the painting is done in full before the paint dries, typically in a single session. The shortened time frame pushes the artist to really create the impression of the subject, showcasing much more movement as the layered stages from earlier just blend together, meaning that painting and drawing really become synonymous. And ultimately, oil painting at its core is much more like sculpting, putting on more material, removing paint, shaping and reshaping, constantly molding the forms. The proportions, the values, the colors, they all start to happen at the same time. When first trying this method, go back to your monochromatic palette, and after your first few studies, start to add more colors and change up the palette. Hold on, wait a second. I already have a complete step-by-step video tutorial explaining the alla prima approach using the Zorn palette. In that video, I take you through the whole process, from mixing your palette to those finishing touches. And yes, the link is now in that enormous description. My apologies for forcing you to navigate that. Initially, do not worry about the outcome of the image. It is far more important just to experience the techniques. And while you're at it, try out all the color palettes, including the co-primary palette. Now this should go without saying, but these are only a few of the many oil painting techniques, methods, approaches, and color palettes that are out there. But these should give you a solid working foundation. And above all, to continue and further push your curiosity. Just so you know that no matter what anyone says, there's no perfect way to learn all of this.
Sigh. Yes, there is, Michael.
Well, I meant one that works for everyone. In reality, learning to paint is truly discovered through repetition and practice. Artist and teacher Joseph Albers always said that making art was more about the search rather than the research, prizing the exploration over the passive study. So this section, and in reality the whole video, are not meant as a solution, but rather a start. In all honesty, starting might be the most important aspect to learning anything, but also it's the most difficult thing to do. And yes, you will make mistakes. A lot of them. Every artist does, especially the longer you do this. But the most beautiful part is that through all those mistakes, that's where the true learning happens. And with it, the real creations. So please allow yourself the patience it requires and the grace you deserve. Oh, one more thing. Never ever get caught up with the acknowledgement of talent. Really, that's the emergence of your passion and individual voice, unencumbered by expectation. Okay. This video is done. It is time to start painting. However, I will leave you with this. Just relax. Yes, painting is very difficult, but it is just so amazing and so very rewarding. Honestly, it is best summed up like this, in the words of a great artist, brilliant teacher, and an awesome friend. Even a bad day painting is still a great day. So cheers to you all, and good luck. Come on, Odie, let's get you your dinner.
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go. Boom, boom.